Princess Leora of the Valerian Empire had learned to stand exactly 6 feet from everyone, the distance that kept her lethal touch from accidentally claiming another life while maintaining the illusion of royal accessibility. She moved through the palace corridors with the practiced grace of someone who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of looking approachable while remaining fundamentally untouchable. "Your Highness," her chief advisor Lord Kieran said, maintaining the careful spatial relationship that had become second nature to everyone in her court, "the human military delegation has arrived for the tactical consultation regarding the Skarn advance." Leora nodded, adjusting the ceremonial gloves that served no protective purpose but helped remind others to maintain distance. "How many advisors did they send?" "3 senior officers, Your Highness. Captain James Mitchell will be leading the strategic analysis, Commander Sarah Chin handles logistics coordination, and Lieutenant Colonel David Park specializes in alien warfare tactics." The names meant nothing to Leora, but she'd learned to appreciate any distraction from the crushing weight of leading a war effort while locked in complete physical isolation. The Skarn collective's advance toward Valerian space represented an existential threat that required the best military minds available, even if that meant working with alien allies who didn't understand the complexities of her condition. "Have they been briefed about court protocols?" Leora asked, the question carrying weight that Lord Kieran understood perfectly. "I thought it best to allow you to determine how much information to share about your unique circumstances," Kieran replied carefully. "The humans have been informed about general Valerian customs and hierarchy, but specific details about your condition were omitted from their briefing materials." Leora felt the familiar knot of anxiety that accompanied meeting new people who didn't understand why she couldn't accept simple gestures like handshakes or congratulatory embraces. Every new encounter required careful navigation between maintaining diplomatic respect and avoiding the physical contact that could kill. The War Council chamber had been prepared with her needs in mind, the human delegation seated at precisely measured distances, her own chair positioned to prevent accidental contact, and emergency medical staff discreetly stationed nearby in case her biokinetic abilities were accidentally triggered. When the human officers entered, Leora immediately noted their military bearing and the casual way they interacted with each other. Friendly shoulder pats, handshakes, the kind of easy physical contact she hadn't experienced in over a decade. Commander Chen and Lieutenant Colonel Park approached with the formal respect she'd expected, offering slight bows that maintained appropriate distance. Captain Mitchell was different. He walked directly toward her with the confident stride of someone accustomed to meeting people as equals, his hand extended for a handshake that would kill him instantly if she allowed contact. Leora felt panic spike through her system as she realized that Lord Kieran's omission from the briefing materials had created exactly the situation she'd been dreading. "Your Highness," Captain Mitchell said with genuine warmth, apparently interpreting her frozen expression as surprise rather than terror, "it's an honor to work with the Valerian Empire. I've studied your military campaigns against the hegemony wars, and your strategic innovations were brilliant." His extended hand hung in the air between them as Leora struggled to find words that would redirect his gesture without requiring explanation of her lethal condition. The other humans watched with polite attention, clearly expecting a standard diplomatic greeting. "Captain Mitchell," Leora said, her voice carrying the controlled composure she'd perfected through years of practice, "the honor is mine. Please, be seated and let us begin our strategic discussions." She gestured toward the chairs with movements designed to draw attention away from her failure to accept his handshake, but Mitchell's military training made him observant enough to notice the deliberate avoidance. "Of course, Your Highness," he said, lowering his hand with a slight puzzled expression that suggested he was filing away her reaction for later analysis. As the meeting progressed, Leora found herself simultaneously impressed by Captain Mitchell's tactical brilliance and tormented by his casual manner around her. He treated her with the same respectful professionalism he showed her military advisors, no excessive deference, no fearful distance, and no awareness that she was considered too dangerous to touch. "The Skarn advance pattern suggests they're testing our response times rather than committing to full assault," Mitchell observed, studying the holographic displays with focused intensity. "Your Highness, have your intelligence networks detected any unusual fleet movements in the border sectors?" The question was asked with the natural expectation of collaborative discussion, as if she were simply another military leader rather than a dangerous artifact to be carefully managed. Leora felt her chest tighten with something she'd almost forgotten, the desire for normal human interaction. Our scouts report increased probe activity along the Meridian Pass, she replied, finding it easier to focus on tactical discussions than on the growing awareness that Captain Mitchell was treating her like a person instead of a threat. That confirms the pattern, Mitchell said, leaning slightly forward with enthusiasm that brought him closer to her than anyone had been in months. Your Highness, if we coordinate our fleet positioning with Earth's patrol schedules, we could create overlapping coverage that would give us early warning of any major Skarn movement. His excitement. Captain Mitchell returned 3 days later with detailed intelligence reports and the same easy confidence that had both charmed and terrified Leora during their first meeting. She'd spent the intervening time alternating between looking forward to seeing him again and dreading the moment when someone would inevitably warn him about her condition. Your Highness, Mitchell said as he entered the strategy room, once again moving toward her with the natural assumption that normal human interaction was possible. I've been analyzing the Skarn probe patterns, and I think we may have been underestimating their intelligence-gathering capabilities. Leora felt her pulse quicken as he approached, stopping just close enough that she could see the excitement in his eyes as he prepared to share his discoveries. His proximity made her acutely aware of how long it had been since anyone had been comfortable enough to stand within arm's reach of her. What have you discovered? She asked, focusing on his tactical insights to distract herself from the dangerous intimacy of having someone nearby who didn't fear her. The probe routes aren't random, Mitchell said, pulling out a portable holographic projector and activating displays that required him to move even closer to ensure she could see the details clearly. They're mapping our response patterns with scientific precision. Your Highness, I think we're dealing with opponents who are studying us rather than simply testing our defenses. The revelation was strategically significant, but Leora found herself more focused on the way Mitchell unconsciously moved into her personal space while explaining his analysis. His body language carried none of the careful distance she'd grown accustomed to. He gestured naturally, leaned in to point out details, and treated her presence as if physical proximity was perfectly normal. If they're studying our tactics, Leora said, struggling to maintain professional focus while her starved senses catalogued every detail of having someone nearby, then our standard defense protocols may be giving them exactly the information they need to plan a successful invasion. Exactly, Mitchell said, his excitement causing him to step even closer as he manipulated the holographic controls. But if we understand their intelligence-gathering methods, we can feed them false information while preparing defenses they won't expect. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Leora found herself genuinely engaged with the strategic problem despite her growing awareness of how much she'd missed having someone who treated her as an intellectual equal rather than a dangerous artifact. Captain, she said, surprising herself with how natural it felt to use his rank rather than maintaining formal distance, your analysis suggests we should be planning deception operations rather than straightforward defensive positioning. Yes, but more than that, Mitchell said, turning toward her with an expression of respect that made her chest tight with emotions she'd thought were safely buried. Your Highness, your reputation for tactical innovation is what made Earth Command specifically request this partnership. They believe that Valerian strategic thinking combined with human adaptability could create approaches that neither species would develop alone. The compliment hit Leora harder than it should have, partly because genuine professional respect had become rare in her isolated existence, but mostly because Mitchell delivered it with the kind of direct sincerity that suggested he saw her as a capable leader rather than a royal figurehead to be protected. I appreciate the confidence, she said, allowing warmth to enter her voice despite the growing risk that emotional connection would make the inevitable revelation of her condition more devastating for both of them. As their discussion continued, Leora noticed that Mitchell's body language was becoming increasingly relaxed and friendly. He gestured more freely, smiled more often, and showed the kind of casual physical expression that she'd observed in others but hadn't been able to participate in for 15 years. The crisis moment came when Mitchell reached across the tactical display to adjust a projection setting, his movement bringing his hand within inches of hers as they both worked with the holographic controls. Leora jerked back so suddenly that she knocked over her water glass, the crash drawing Mitchell's immediate attention to her obvious distress. "Your Highness, are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern replacing his tactical enthusiasm as he studied her reaction. Leora felt panic creeping up her throat as she realized that her extreme response to near contact had created exactly the situation she'd been trying to avoid. "I'm fine, Captain." Simply, startled by the technical malfunction. But Mitchell's military training made him observant, and his expression suggested he was analyzing her reaction with the same systematic attention he'd applied to Skarn probe patterns. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I've noticed that you seem uncomfortable with close proximity. If I've done something to make you feel unsafe or disrespected, please tell me so I can correct my behavior." The genuine concern in his voice made Leora realize that her attempts to avoid explanation were creating misunderstandings that could damage both their professional relationship and his opinion of himself. Mitchell was interpreting her fear of accidental contact as personal rejection or cultural insensitivity. "Captain, you've done nothing wrong," she said, struggling to find words that would reassure him without revealing the truth she wasn't ready to share. "Valerian court customs can be complex for those unfamiliar with our traditions." "Of course," Mitchell said, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. "Your Highness, would it be helpful if you provided specific guidance about appropriate interaction protocols? I want to ensure that our professional partnership operates smoothly." The offer was reasonable and respectful, but it forced Leora to confront the impossibility of maintaining their connection without eventually revealing why physical contact with her was lethal. Every tactical session brought them closer to the moment when her condition would be exposed, and Mitchell's growing personal interest made that revelation increasingly complicated. "Captain," she said quietly, "there are aspects of Valerian royal customs that are difficult to explain to outsiders. Perhaps it would be best if we maintained formal professional distance during our strategic consultations." Mitchell's expression shifted to something that looked like disappointment mixed with confusion. "Certainly, Your Highness. Though I hope I haven't damaged the collaborative relationship we were developing." "You haven't," Leora said, hating the hurt she could see in his eyes while knowing that allowing him to grow closer would only make the eventual revelation more painful. The truth revealed itself in the worst possible way during a Skarn infiltration attack that breached the palace's outer defenses 3 weeks into the human consultation. Leora was reviewing tactical reports in her private study when the emergency alarms began screaming through the corridors, followed by the sounds of energy weapons and running feet that meant enemies had penetrated deeper into the palace than anyone had thought possible. Captain Mitchell appeared in her doorway within minutes, his weapon drawn and his expression carrying the focused intensity of someone trained to protect others during crisis situations. "Your Highness, we need to get you to the secure bunker immediately," he said, moving toward her with the purposeful stride of someone whose military instincts had overridden all concerns about court protocol. Behind him came Sergeant Torres, her personal guard, whose face carried the grim determination of someone prepared to die protecting his princess. "Your Highness, Skarn infiltrators have reached the royal wing. We have perhaps minutes before they breach this section." Leora felt her carefully controlled world fracturing as the crisis forced impossible choices: remain in her study and risk capture by enemies who would certainly kill her, or attempt evacuation through corridors where combat situations could force the physical contact that made her as dangerous to her protectors as to her enemies. "The secure passage leads through the garden courtyard," Sergeant Torres continued, consulting his tactical display while obviously calculating escape routes. "If we move quickly, we can reach the bunker before the infiltrators cut off our access." Mitchell nodded, his attention focused on Leora with the kind of protective intensity that made her realize he was prepared to risk his life for her safety. "Your Highness, we need to leave now." The evacuation began as a controlled movement through service corridors, but deteriorated rapidly when they encountered Skarn infiltrators who had anticipated their escape route. Energy weapons lit up the darkened passages as Sergeant Torres and Captain Mitchell fought to clear a path toward the secure bunker, their coordinated tactics proving effective against enemies who hadn't expected professional military resistance. Leora followed close behind them, her heart racing with the unfamiliar terror of physical danger combined with the constant awareness that combat situations could force the accidental contact that would transform her protectors into victims. The disaster occurred in the garden courtyard when a Skarn sniper's shot caught Sergeant Torres in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him stumbling backward toward Leora's position. His momentum carried him into her path just as she was moving toward cover, and his instinctive grab for support to prevent falling brought his hand into direct contact with her bare arm. The biokinetic drain was immediate and visible. Torres's life energy flowed into Leora in streams of light that were beautiful and horrifying in equal measure, his eyes widening with shock as he felt his strength being pulled from his body into hers. The euphoric sensation that accompanied the energy transfer lasted only seconds before the lethal reality became apparent. Torres was dying, and her touch was killing him. "No," Leora whispered, trying to pull away, but Torres's grip had tightened reflexively as the energy drain weakened his motor control. Captain Mitchell witnessed the entire sequence. The moment of contact, the visible energy transfer, Torres's collapse as his life force was absorbed into Leora's biokinetic system, and her anguished expression as she realized she had killed someone trying to protect her. "Torres!" Mitchell shouted, dropping to his knees beside the fallen guard while staring at Leora with an expression of shock and growing understanding. "He's dead," Leora said quietly, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had experienced this particular horror before. "I killed him. My touch killed him." Mitchell stared at Torres's body, then at Leora, his military mind obviously processing implications that reframed everything he thought he understood about the princess he'd been working with for weeks. "Your condition," he said slowly, "the distance you maintain from everyone, your reaction when I almost touched you during our tactical sessions, you're lethal to physical contact." "Biokinetic energy absorption," Leora confirmed, backing away from both Mitchell and Torres's body with movements that carried 15 years of practice at avoiding accidental contact. "Anyone who touches my skin directly experiences life force drain that's initially euphoric but becomes fatal within minutes." Mitchell rose slowly, his weapon still ready but his attention focused entirely on Leora's revelation. "How long have you known?" "Since I was 14, Leora said, watching his face for the fear and revulsion she'd learned to expect when people understood what she was. "My powers manifested during a court celebration. 3 people died before my family understood what was happening." "3 people," Mitchell repeated, his voice carrying the tone of someone calculating the psychological impact of accidentally killing multiple individuals during adolescence. "My dance partner, a servant who tried to help when I collapsed, and my cousin who attempted to comfort me afterward," Leora said, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of guilt and isolation. "Since then, I haven't touched another living being. No handshakes, no embraces, no casual contact of any kind." Mitchell looked around the garden courtyard where Torres's body lay surrounded by the aftermath of combat, his expression processing both the immediate tactical situation and the personal revelation that recontextualized every interaction they'd shared. "Your Highness," he said finally, "we still need to reach the secure bunker. The Skarn infiltrators are still hunting for me," Leora finished, understanding that even her devastating confession couldn't pause the immediate danger they faced. "Captain, now you understand why evacuation protocols for me are so complex. Anyone who tries to help me physically risks death." Mitchell studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable as he made calculations that would determine both their survival and their future relationship. "Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying the steady tone of someone who had reached a decision, "can you control the energy absorption consciously, or is it entirely involuntary?" The question surprised Leora, who had expected fear or withdrawal rather than tactical analysis of her abilities. "It's involuntary upon skin contact, but the rate of drain varies with my emotional state and the duration of contact. Then we modify our evacuation approach to account for your capabilities," Mitchell said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone adapting to new mission parameters. "Stay close enough for protection but far enough to prevent accidental contact. I'll clear the path to the bunker, and you follow at a safe distance." Leora stared at him, unable to process that his immediate response to learning about her lethal condition was tactical adaptation rather than rejection or fear. "Captain," she said, "you realize that helping me means..." In the weeks following the Skarn infiltration and Sergeant Torres's death, Captain Mitchell's behavior toward Leora shifted in subtle ways that surprised her. Instead of the fear or careful distance she'd expected after he witnessed her lethal touch, he seemed more comfortable around her, as if understanding her condition had eliminated uncertainty rather than creating new barriers. "Your Highness," Mitchell said during their next tactical session, settling into his chair with the easy confidence she remembered from their early meetings, "I've been researching biokinetic phenomena in the Earth database, and I think we may have been approaching your condition with incomplete information." Leora felt her pulse quicken at his casual mention of her abilities. Since Torres's death, she'd been bracing for the inevitable moment when Mitchell would request transfer to avoid the risk of working with her, but instead he seemed to be treating her biokinetic powers as a tactical factor to be understood rather than feared. "What kind of information?" she asked, surprised by how much she wanted to hear his analysis. "Human neural physiology processes biokinetic energy differently than Valerian systems," Mitchell said, pulling out his research materials with the focused enthusiasm she'd learned to associate with his strategic insights. "According to Earth medical databases, human resistance to life force drain varies significantly based on mental preparation and physiological conditioning." The implications of his research hit Leora like a tactical revelation that reframed everything she thought she understood about her own abilities. "You're suggesting that my touch might not be uniformly lethal to all species?" "I'm suggesting that controlled contact with proper preparation might be possible," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone proposing a dangerous experiment. "Your Highness, has anyone ever tested your abilities with volunteers who understood the risks and were prepared for biokinetic interaction?" Leora felt a mix of hope and terror at the direction of his research. "Captain, the risk is manageable with proper protocols," Mitchell interrupted gently. "Your Highness, I've read reports of human biokinetic practitioners who work with energy absorption techniques for medical and psychological applications. Brief, controlled contact with prepared subjects appears to be survivable if properly managed." The possibility that her touch might not be universally fatal opened emotional territories that Leora had sealed off 15 years ago. "Captain, even if human physiology offers greater resistance to biokinetic drain, the risk of killing you would still be significant." "Yes," Mitchell agreed, meeting her eyes with steady sincerity, "but so is the risk of you spending the rest of your life in complete physical isolation when that might not be necessary." His willingness to risk his life for the possibility of offering her human contact made Leora's chest tight with emotions that went far beyond professional respect. "Why would you take such a risk for someone you've known for only a few weeks?" Mitchell's expression softened in ways that suggested his answer went beyond tactical or diplomatic concerns. "Because watching you maintain perfect royal composure while carrying the weight of complete isolation is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever witnessed. And because I think you're remarkable enough to be worth almost any risk." The confession hung between them like a tactical weapon that could either strengthen their alliance or destroy everything they'd built together. Leora felt her carefully maintained emotional defenses cracking under the weight of someone offering her exactly what she thought was permanently lost. "Captain," she said quietly, "you realize that what you're suggesting could kill you for the possibility of a few moments of human contact. And you realize that what I'm suggesting could give you back something that every person deserves, the right to touch and be touched by someone who cares about you," Mitchell replied, his voice carrying conviction that made her understand this wasn't an impulsive offer but a carefully considered decision. In the weeks following the Scarn infiltration and Sergeant Torres's death, Captain Mitchell's behavior toward Leora shifted in subtle ways that surprised her. Instead of the fear or careful distance she'd expected after he witnessed her lethal touch, he seemed more comfortable around her, as if understanding her condition had eliminated uncertainty rather than creating new barriers. "Your Highness," Mitchell said during their next tactical session, settling into his chair with the easy confidence she remembered from their early meetings, "I've been researching biokinetic phenomena in the Earth database, and I think we may have been approaching your condition with incomplete information." Leora felt her pulse quicken at his casual mention of her abilities. Since Torres's death, she'd been bracing for the inevitable moment when Mitchell would request transfer to avoid the risk of working with her, but instead he seemed to be treating her biokinetic powers as a tactical factor to be understood rather than feared. "What kind of information?" she asked, surprised by how much she wanted to hear his analysis. Human neural physiology processes biokinetic energy differently than Valerian systems, Mitchell said, pulling out his research materials with the focused enthusiasm she'd learned to associate with his strategic insights. According to Earth medical databases, human resistance to life force drain varies significantly based on mental preparation and physiological conditioning. The implications of his research hit Leora like a tactical revelation that reframed everything she thought she understood about her own abilities. "You're suggesting that my touch might not be uniformly lethal to all species?" "I'm suggesting that controlled contact with proper preparation might be possible," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone proposing a dangerous experiment. "Your Highness, has anyone ever tested your abilities with volunteers who understood the risks and were prepared for biokinetic interaction?" Leora felt a mix of hope and terror at the direction of his research. "Captain, the risk is manageable with proper protocols," Mitchell interrupted gently. "Your Highness, I've read reports of human biokinetic practitioners who work with energy absorption techniques for medical and psychological applications. Brief, controlled contact with prepared subjects appears to be survivable if properly managed." The possibility that her touch might not be universally fatal opened emotional territories that Leora had sealed off 15 years ago. "Captain, even if human physiology offers greater resistance to biokinetic drain, the risk of killing you would still be significant." "Yes," Mitchell agreed, meeting her eyes with steady sincerity, "but so is the risk of you spending the rest of your life in complete physical isolation when that might not be necessary." His willingness to risk his life for the possibility of offering her human contact made Leora's chest tight with emotions that went far beyond professional respect. "Why would you take such a risk for someone you've known for only a few weeks?" Mitchell's expression softened in ways that suggested his answer went beyond tactical or diplomatic concerns. "Because watching you maintain perfect royal composure while carrying the moment came during a quiet evening when the palace was secure and medical staff were discreetly positioned nearby, their presence a sobering reminder of what could go wrong." James had spent hours preparing through meditation techniques designed to strengthen his resistance to biokinetic drain, while Leora had fought every instinct that screamed against risking his life for her desperate need for human contact. "Are you certain about this?" Leora asked for the third time, her voice tight with fear as they sat facing each other in her private chambers, close enough that she could see the steady determination in his eyes. "I'm certain," James replied, his voice carrying the calm confidence she'd learned to associate with his most critical tactical decisions. "Leora, I've calculated the risks, prepared for the consequences, and decided that the possibility of giving you back human touch is worth whatever might happen to me." She stared at his extended hand, knowing that the next few moments would either open possibilities she'd thought were lost forever or confirm that her touch was indeed too dangerous for anyone to survive. "The preparation techniques should help," James said quietly, "but we both understand that this is still experimental. If something goes wrong, I'll be responsible for killing the person who means more to me than anyone in 15 years, Leora interrupted, her voice breaking with the weight of what she was about to risk. "And if nothing goes wrong," James said, his eyes meeting hers with steady warmth, "you'll discover that isolation doesn't have to be permanent." Leora looked at his hand, strong, steady, offered with full knowledge of what her touch could do, and realized that the choice between safety and connection had already been made the moment she'd allowed herself to care about someone again. "James," she whispered, "if this kills you, I'll never forgive myself." "And if we don't try," he replied softly, "neither of us will ever know what might have been possible." She reached toward his hand with movements that trembled despite 15 years of royal composure training. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into sensation. The biokinetic connection was immediate and overwhelming, James's life energy flowing into her in streams of warmth that felt like coming alive after years of numbness. But instead of the uncontrolled drain that had killed Torres, the energy transfer felt balanced, controlled by James's prepared mental state and her own desperate desire not to harm him. For Leora, the touch represented the first physical contact in 15 years that wasn't accidental or lethal, and the emotional impact was staggering. 15 years of isolation, of carefully maintained distance, of watching others enjoy casual touches she couldn't share. All of it dissolved into the simple miracle of holding someone's hand. She collapsed, not from biokinetic feedback but from pure relief so overwhelming that her body couldn't remain upright. 15 years of armor around her heart cracked open all at once, releasing emotions she'd kept locked away since adolescence. "Leora," James said, his voice strained but conscious as he maintained the contact that should have been killing him, "are you all right?" "I'm touching you," she whispered through tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry in years, "and you're still alive." The energy connection between them lasted 30 seconds before James's strength began to deplete, forcing them to break contact before the drain became dangerous. But it was enough, 30 seconds of human touch that proved controlled contact was possible. "It worked," James said, his voice weak but triumphant as he squeezed her hand one final time before releasing it. "Leora, it actually worked." She stared at him through tears of relief and joy, this remarkable man who had risked his life to prove that her touch could be healing rather than harmful. "You could have died." "But I didn't," James replied, his smile transforming his exhausted features into an expression of pure happiness. "And now we know that careful, brief contact is possible. Leora, you don't have to spend the rest of your life in isolation." The implications crashed over her like a wave of possibility that reframed everything about her future. "James, what we just did, it changes everything." "Everything," he agreed, his eyes bright with affection that no longer had to be expressed only through words and careful distance. "Leora, I love you. And now I can actually hold your hand while I tell you that." 6 months later, Leora stood in the research facility she and James had established to study biokinetic phenomena and develop protocols for others with similar conditions. Their careful documentation of controlled contact techniques had helped dozens of individuals learn to manage abilities that had previously condemned them to isolation. "Any regrets?" James asked, approaching her with the confident stride that still made her heart skip, his hand extended in the casual gesture that had become natural between them through months of carefully managed contact. Leora considered the question as she took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of their biokinetic connection carefully controlled through techniques they'd developed together. Their relationship required constant attention to energy flow management, strict protocols for contact duration, and medical monitoring that made every touch a calculated risk. But it had also given her back the human connection she'd thought was lost forever. "Just one regret," she said, watching his expression shift to concern. "What's that?" "I regret all the years I spent believing that being dangerous meant I couldn't also be loved," Leora said, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had learned to accept both her power and her vulnerability. "It turns out that the right person doesn't see your abilities as obstacles, they see them as part of what makes you worth the risk." James's smile blazed with joy as he carefully pulled her closer, their practiced movements ensuring contact remained safe while allowing the intimacy she'd craved for 15 years. "In that case," he said, his voice carrying warmth that made her biokinetic abilities sing with harmonious energy, "I'm grateful for biokinetic research, calculated risks, and princesses who are brave enough to let someone hold their hand even when it might kill them." Around them, the research facility hummed with the collaborative energy of scientists and former patients working together to develop better understanding of biokinetic phenomena. Their love story had become the foundation for research that helped other, untouchable, individuals reclaim human connection, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries came from being willing to risk everything for the simple miracle of holding someone's hand. The woman who had collapsed from overwhelming relief the first time someone touched her with love instead of fear now stood steady and strong, supported by someone who had proven that her touch could be healing rather than harmful when offered to the right person with proper preparation and infinite patience.